Hello everyone, this is Ohio Dan. I wanted to put an idea out there about the consequences of trying to red pill a man when it comes to men's issues, when it comes to male and female nature, and where things actually stand in society today for men and women. I wanted to talk about one type of man that you probably don't want to try to go out there and red pill. Now, I'm aware and have become aware years ago now of the kind of foolhardiness of trying to red pill random people. So I'm not talking about going up to people and cold approaching them with red pill ideas or being like, you need to watch MGTOW videos or you need to watch videos about hypergamy and solipsism. Really, it makes a lot more sense to just not discuss those things in many situations anyway. Unless you're in a one-on-one situation and someone is asking you about the state of affairs between men and women, or the topic comes up of feminism and how it's biased in favor of women and not really about equality and so forth, then you can broach certain red pill ideas, probably in small doses. But assuming that you're willing to do that in some cases, where it seems like you could potentially reach a guy with these sort of fundamental ideas of, hey, women actually have the upper hand. We basically have a two-tier system where there's a set of rules that applies to men but not women, and it's designed to basically take your resources as a guy if you get married, and people will just blame you for it and say you picked the wrong woman because society as it stands today doesn't really respect good men. You can talk about all that if the discussion comes up, in some cases at least, if you're willing to. But the one type of man that you probably don't want to do this with, in my opinion, is a man that is already married or currently in a long-term relationship with a woman. In my opinion, there's a high risk of negative consequences when trying to red pill a man who is already married, like I've said, or has some form of committed relationship with a woman. And this is because of the immense negative upfront costs psychologically for a man to adopt this perspective, right? To become self-aware or have more awareness of where things actually stand between men and women, rather than continuing to have delusional beliefs, frankly, about relationships and the state of affairs today between men and women. And so, in other words, he basically is automatically going to have this extreme cognitive dissonance because he's in a trap then. He has to acknowledge that he's kind of fallen into a pitfall that might be hard to get out of. He has to acknowledge that his wife could divorce him and take half his stuff in his house. He has to acknowledge that the woman that he envisions himself, even if he hasn't actually technically committed to her, that he envisions himself being with potentially for the rest of his life, he has to factor in the possibility that, oh, actually, that's like playing Russian roulette, and maybe I shouldn't do that. It really doesn't make sense to think that a man, no matter how rational and objective and intelligent he may be in most circumstances, that he's going to be able to deal with that. That's too much psychological stress at one time for a man to actually overcome. It's so much easier to just say, my wife would never do that. It's so much easier to say, my woman loves me, and she's not like that. So you're full of shit, Dan. And that's what's usually going to happen if you try to red pill a man in that scenario. Now, is there an exception to that? Maybe, if a guy is going into the process of getting divorced potentially, if he's already getting out of that scenario and you want to try to reach him as he winds the relationship down, so to speak, right? As it's coming to an end, or maybe she's cheating on him or whatever. But even then, you got to be very careful with this particular type of man. A man would need, in this situation, to go through what would approach an existential crisis in order to embrace red pill or MGTOW ideas or beliefs while already in this type of long-term relationship with a woman. He would have to contradict so many of the decisions that he made up to that point, along with being in love with her, most likely, if he was going to accept red pill ideas as valid. And so you're going to strike out if you do that. That's my experience, is these men cannot see reality and the truth of where things actually are between men and women. Not that every relationship is bad or every marriage is bad for the guy, But it's a bad situation to be in because of the power that the woman has over you in that situation. And so even if it is a bad situation, even if you know she's going to cheat, even if you can tell that a woman doesn't have good intentions, if he's in love with her, if he's committed to her in any way, it's not just casual dating or basically being in a relationship, but you know the guy is not too attached, then these ideas that we call red pill or MGTOW ideas will not work with him. It will backfire and he will probably lash out at you. That's sort of the behavior pattern I've seen because it's just too much to take to consider these types of things if you're already a man in that situation. And it's not even about acknowledging that, hey, my woman's bad and everything that I thought about her was wrong. It's just the relationship is unhealthy because of what that can mean for you if she divorces you, and that happens half the time. That most men that get married don't think that they're going to get divorced, and it happens anyway because women file for divorce over 2/3 of the time. This is the type of thing that he would have to accept in that situation, and it's just too much cognitive dissonance. He has to contradict so much of his thought process up to that point. It's very unlikely to happen. Therefore, it is usually counterproductive to directly reference ideas along the lines of female nature or the position of men in society for what it really is to a man who has already made the decision to commit to a woman. It's going to lead to something negative way more often than it's actually going to get him to think about these concepts from what I've seen, or from just the interactions of married men coming on videos or posts and saying, my woman's not like that, she'd never do that to me. I've seen that consistently over the years because these men are not in a position where they can really evaluate these ideas objectively in a way that's not extremely painful, and as I mentioned, causes potentially something close to an existential crisis for him being in that situation already, for him already being committed to a woman. If sometime later the man in this scenario finds himself single and without attachment, there may be a future opportunity to discuss red pill concepts with him at that point. If the scenario for him changes, if he gets divorced, if he breaks up with a woman before they get married, if he finds out that he's just basically better off without her, at that point, you might be able to reach him. Now, whether he'll stick with that or whether it's just a thing where he's only interested because he's heartbroken, or he's only interested because he's going through the divorce, and then a year later he's going to be committed to somebody else, we can't really control that either. But the opportunity could be there after a breakup happens, if it does. And again, I'm not saying this is a good thing overall, but it may not be inevitable, but it's something that happens very often because women are encouraged to cash out and find the bigger, better deal. So at that point, you might be able to reach the guy or you might not be able to. But while he's married or in a long-term committed type of relationship, it's very unlikely that there's going to be a positive outcome from everything I've seen for trying to get him to see things as they are. You do have some men that TFM described years ago as awakened while married, but I don't see those men as really being very typical. Like, they are very, very rare. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. If you know guys that are married that can't be MGTOW but have a lot of red pill, self-aware realizations about where things are for men today in relation to women, in relation to society, maybe there are a lot of guys that I'm not aware of that are awakened while married, but I don't see them very often, even compared to guys like the MGTOW single men, or even the guys that mostly have an understanding of what's going on and are honest about men really not having an opportunity to have a family because the woman can just take your family at any time. How is a man that's already married going to be able to acknowledge that when he's already in that situation? It's just not something that I recommend based on my observations in this community over the years. And so, in the meantime, while a guy is still married or in a committed relationship of some form with a woman, this type of man, trying to red pill him, trying to get him to wake up, so to speak, to a lot of fundamental things that are going on between men and women, and how women really have the upper hand in these long-term relationships, and the man could basically lose half his stuff in a divorce. At that point, it's kind of too late, at least for the time being. It's kind of too late unless a future scenario presents itself where he's no longer in that relationship. And it's just going to cause more harm than good, and will usually backfire if you try to do that. So I've noticed that in some cases, guys will put the red pill out there, even for married men, and see whether they may be able to make use of it. And I just don't think they can. Not for the most part. Not in the true sense of actually recognizing, wait a second, the system's designed to basically exploit me in this situation. The system's designed to just get me to be a provider for kids that can be taken away from me. The system's designed to allow the woman to engage with her hypergamous instincts and just leave me for a guy that has more stuff and take half my stuff at the same time. I know that there can be positive outcomes to relationships to an extent, but the realization that a woman could just do that at any time is something that married men and men that are in love and committed to one woman, they're not going to be able to accept this. It contradicts too many things about what they're thinking and what they're feeling at the time. And I think we should concentrate on the men that are still single and unattached instead, for the most part, when it comes to potentially introducing what we could call red pill ideas or concepts to particular men. If you're going to do that, don't do that with men that are already married or already committed to a woman, because in my opinion, that's going to backfire the vast majority of the time. Right, I'm not saying this because I don't think we should want to help these men. I just think that as long as those men are in that situation, they're pretty much beyond help. And there are other categories of guys that, if this guy's a feminist, there's no point in really trying to red pill that guy either, because his thinking is so far askew, his understanding is so far off that he's probably never going to be self-aware unless he completely changes his political viewpoints. You could talk about this with other groups of men like that as well, but I've just noticed in particular that men that are married or already attached in a committed relationship with a woman that they love, for the most part, unless they came into that relationship being self-aware and kind of worked around the negatives and didn't actually commit to her, and there are guys that try to do that as well, but for men that are pretty much clueless to start off with and are already married, they're already in long-term committed relationships with a woman, you're not going to reach them. Nothing positive, generally speaking, is going to happen if you try to introduce red pill or MGTOW ideas to them. As long as they're still in that situation, they're most likely too far gone. And if you're going to talk about red pill concepts, male nature, female nature, where things actually stand for men in society, you're better off doing this, I think, exclusively with men who are already single and not attached. They're not in that bind to begin with. You can reach those men potentially in individual cases. That's not really true with men that are already married, who are already committed to a woman. Unless at some point in the future they're no longer in that relationship, that's going to backfire, and so I wouldn't recommend trying to reach those men with these concepts.